So apparently Danny Boyle's new film Yesterday has been somewhat divisive amongst movie critics, drawing ire for its admittedly silly premise as well as the drastic difference in quality between a rather trite romantic comedy and previous works directed by Boyle such as Trainspotting, Slumdog Millionaire, or 127 Hours. As someone who has only seen 30 minutes of Trainspotting because a libertarian friend of mine said it was his favorite movie, even I can appreciate it as a cinematic masterpiece. The movie, being about heroin addiction, portrays the attraction to the drug amazingly well, despite being a humorous take on such a self-destructive lifestyle. Slumdog Millionaire and 127 Hours, being the only movies I've seen of Boyle's, are much better than Yesterday, despite being laden with their own issues. I definitely see why people see this movie as a step down on almost every level from those films, because it undeniably is. However, I am left with one burning question. What the hell did y'all expect? The second I heard about the premise, I never expected to see this film. First and foremost, because I don't like the Beatles that much. I don't deny that they were influential and had some great tunes. Hey Jude, and indeed, Yesterday, are beautiful in their own right. But the second I tried out Sgt. Pepper to see what the hype was about, I very quickly realized that the band just was not for me. Secondly, I felt, as many music buffs were quick to point out, Anthony Fantano specifically comes to mind, preposterous is the idea that one could pluck the Beatles' discography out of time as if those groundbreaking songs and albums were created in a vacuum, and market those same songs today and receive the same success the band got through the 60s and 70s. They had such a huge influence on the music of today and music of the past 50 years that the music landscape of the present would look drastically different had they never existed. Again, I never expected to watch this film. It's only when, on a trip to see Rocket Man with my siblings and grandmother, we discovered that the theater was packed and no seats were available, it was then that we decided to give Yesterday a watch instead. I expected to hate this movie, and yet, I had a great time. Perhaps it was because I've never cared for the Beatles that I was able to appreciate what others might see as a butchering of their legacy. Perhaps it's because it was impossible to take seriously the entire runtime. Perhaps it's because the movie was just unapologetically exactly what I expected it to be, that I found the entire affair to be charming. The fact is, I enjoyed Yesterday, so I thought I'd go through the problems I'm seeing others have with it and just address why at the end of the day, they mattered little to me. Spoilers are coming, by the way, hope that's obvious.
The premise.
This wasn't nearly as much of a turn-off as I expected it would be as soon as I realized the movie knew how dumb the premise actually was, and how it attempted little to nothing to actually justify panning out like it did. The entire film, the protagonist, Jack Malik, is an entirely reactive character. The plot happens to him, and he runs with it. Very rarely do we see him making any choices that define the events that occur afterwards. I can, off the top of my head, recall only 2 decisions Jack makes himself in this film that are in the least bit influential. One being him deciding to crib the entire catalog of the Beatles for himself, and the other being when he decides to release that music for free at the end of the film. Everything else just happens to him. The inciting event is Jack being hit by a bus, and the power going out worldwide, and somehow, this equates to the world just simultaneously forgetting the existence of the Beatles. My first question was, how does the power going out worldwide actually cause this event to occur? Like, what's the correlation there? This is a good question, and the movie never tries to answer it, not even a little. It feels like the movie was more concerned with getting to a world in which the Beatles never existed, rather than establishing how such a world would come about. Once I realized this, however, I quickly began to stop caring about that establishment as well. Because to be quite honest with you, how such a world came about is less interesting than exploring the mechanics of how such a world operates in the first place. There's a recurring joke within the film about using Google to justify what makes a world without the Beatles different than the one we're familiar with, which besides being a realistic method of discovery in the modern landscape, also helps inform the audience of the butterfly effect present when one of the most influential rock bands in history becomes non-existent in the conscience of the world's population. At one point, testing the waters as to what such a change would mean for bands heavily influenced by the Beatles, Jack Googles Oasis, a band defined by its cribbing of John Lennon and co.'s ideas, only to discover they don't exist either. Jack remarks, figures. In my view, This is the movie at least attempting to take into account criticisms made by folks like Anthony Fantano, and acknowledge that music wouldn't be the same, and so much of it wouldn't exist today had the Beatles never existed. Of course, I won't give the movie too much credit in this regard, as the Google joke becomes less and less about what this lack of influence means for the world of music, and more about randomly setting this world apart from our own in small, inconsequential ways. For instance, it's used to invalidate the existence of Coca-Cola, cigarettes, and Harry Potter, the non-existence of Coke being the source of some rather cute jokes within the runtime. John Lennon was also never killed in this universe, because it was his success in music and nearly inescapable celebrity that inspired his assassination in the first place. It makes sense to assume that without those factors, he'd still be alive today. All these aspects of the film, to me, come off more as kinda neat additions rather than serving as any kind of relevant social commentary. Yesterday is a very neat film. It has some clever humor, but what ultimately holds it back from being anything more than that is its portrayal of the rise of Jack Malik.
Success just ain't that easy, kid.
I could tell that the movie was not interested in accurately representing what marketing the discography of the Beatles in the modern age would look like the second Ed Sheeran showed his nappy Brit face on screen. All realism flew out the window, and it was impossible to take Yesterday seriously anymore. After that, I no longer had any expectations the film would have anything of value to say about the music industry, and that held true for the entire runtime afterwards. There are some funny jabs poking fun at the cynicism of record studios and the triteness of the subject matter popular music tends to cover. For instance, Hey Jude doesn't survive its recreation in 2019 without being mutated into Hey Dude. Otherwise, commentary is kept to a minimum, and the emotional core of the film is largely found within Jack Malik's character arc, which gets me to the most interesting facet of Yesterday.
Oh, daddy boy. You'll?
So the question I asked near the beginning of the video, what did you expect, works on two counts. On the one, I honestly don't know how anyone could have seen the promotional material for this movie and thought it was going to be anything more than a cheesy rom-com. I've made my case for that, but it works on the second count as well. If one were to look at the films Danny Boyle has made over his career, he clearly has a fascination with the effects fame and fortune have on those who've been less than fortunate their entire lives. As I said on Twitter, it makes sense the guy who directed Slumdog Millionaire also did this film. But that trend, I very quickly discovered, doesn't stop and end with just those two movies. Don't believe me? Let's take a look. In 2004, Millions tells the story of a motherless Catholic schoolboy, Damien, who when playing in a cardboard box by the train tracks, is disturbed by a bag holding £1 million British pounds being flung out of a passing train. The thrust of the drama comes in the philosophically differing methods Damien and his brother Anthony handle the obscene amount of money. The movie is all about exploring the effects fame and fortune have on those who've been less fortunate their whole lives. In 2008, Slumdog Millionaire is a movie about a down-on-his-luck Indian Muslim named Jamal Malik. Where have we heard that last name before? And his improbable luck with who wants to be a millionaire, considering his origins from what the movie literally describes as slums. The movie is all about exploring the effects fame and fortune have on those who've been less fortunate their entire lives. However, in this case, most of the exploration is done through the lens of how upper society treats those who it doesn't deem worthy of success. In 2019, we have Yesterday, a film which uses its premise to explore imposter syndrome and its effects on a musician who's been unable to catch success for his entire career until he cribs the work of infinitely better songwriters. Do you see the trend here? It's kinda neat, ain't it? Anyways, that's all I have to say about Yesterday. If I had to give it a score, I'd say decent to strong 5. Hope y'all have a good day. My next video should be about cults.